To help make sense of the latest US tariffs, we've got Justin Irvine, friend of the podcast, joining us to take us through all the changes happening in e-commerce as well as Australia Post's very big half. Welcome back to episode 77 of This Week in E-Commerce. I am Nalj here, and with me this week is a very special guest and friend of the podcast, Justin Irvine from the Aggregate Co. Justin, welcome, mate.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Good to be on.
Yep, good to see you as well. It's been a while since I've seen you. You've been jet setting all around the place in the US a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. It's definitely been a pretty heavy start to the year with some decisions made by the new
orange-haired friend.
Our new administration. But yeah, it's definitely, I think what it's done is it's really just created an environment where a lot of brands that are doing so well in the US actually are kind of being shoved into a decision they could have made a couple of years ago. But, they're big decisions and very hard to make. And, we're obviously helping people out with those decisions. So, but I think it's about, you don't know what you don't know. And even in our instance, we're still finding our feet on a lot of the decisions that are getting made. And so is the entire industry. So it's a challenging time and it's definitely a busy time. But yeah, some of the success stories we're seeing out of the moves that we made last year, increase in cart conversion, reductions in cart abandonment, lower customer acquisition costs. Like when you start to weigh up whole of business change, I think a lot of brands will actually start to find their feet and kind of take a bit of a breath and go, actually, that was probably a good move.
Kind of forces your hand, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. It would be nicer to have a little bit more time, if I'm being honest, but yeah, it's definitely I think a change that is going to grow up the industry a little bit. And I say that with utmost respect for the Australian retail industry, but having warehouses in different places around the world is the norm for the UK and US and EU brands. And I feel like if we can structure it, obviously with guidance from yourself and the likes of the Big Show, we can turn around and actually help companies make that next step into that next growth phase, which is really cool. That's the bit that we really like.
And some of the changes, it's kind of fortuitous that we're recording today because today is when the new changes, they've actually enacted all these changes. Yeah. So we can actually see the 25% additional tariff from Mexico and Canada comes into place today, and also the additional 10% on Chinese made goods. So Justin, can you take us through a little bit about what all this means for the retailers listening?
Yeah, I think for a lot of retailers, like there's probably two issues here. One is the de minimis, which is shipping under $800 and then there's the tariffs. So a lot of people get the two confused or try and combine them as kind of like the same thing. Because they've been included in the same executive orders in places, there is some real confusion around it. So what they're saying is, and it came out from the White House early this morning, our time, is that the de minimis will stay in play, but the tariffs from Canada and Mexico will take on effect. And then out of nowhere at the end of last week, an additional 10% on the additional 10% on goods over $800. So we have still a reprieve, and that includes a lot of Australian brands that are positioned in Canada, shipping to the US under threshold. It had been a little bit of what we call a nearshoring hack. So Mexico and Canada. Mexico got on the front foot and banned the use of a particular legislation that a lot of US companies were doing. And so it's kind of killed that whole Mexico thing anyway, as far as the de minimis is concerned for nearshoring. But Canada's still there. Canada's still working. People are still using the ability to defer duties until export. There's a lot of like really cool hacks in relation to cash flow. But this is I've got to stress, this is such a short-term reprieve on the de minimis. We're saying 3 to 6 months as a guideline. I got to be upfront. I'm not in the US government. I'm not setting legislation. These are opinions. So I just wanted to call that out. Is our opinion that it's a 3 to 6 month scenario, but it could be tomorrow. It could be 12 months. But what it is that de minimis in some shape or form will be removed. Now, it might be a case of maybe it gets lowered and it's $250 instead of $800. because now at $250, it's now considered a formal entry into the US if the de minimis goes. If it's there's a transaction charge. There's a big discussion piece and a lot of commentary in the US about adding a $5 or $10 charge that the carriers would get charged, and then obviously charge back to the shipper. And so that was an option and may still come into play as like a halfway house thing for Mr. Trump to be able to get back a level of monies while he's trying to figure out how he collects duties. Because there's like zero ways in which he can collect duties right now. There's no automated process. It's not like the EU where they have IOSS, or the UK where they have EORI, or even Australia and New Zealand, right? Set up an ABM and you register as a foreign entity, pay GST through that function. Not that Sheen and Timo do, but there is a functionality there that exists. And so I think a lot of this in relation to what's happening with Chinese-made goods for Australian retailers is that right now you're okay, but that's a very short-term reprieve. When you look at Canada or Mexico as nearshoring options, again, short-term reprieve. When that goes, it'll go for everybody that's got Chinese goods, just like it did last time. And everyone that was shipping from Canada got hammered with UPS and FedEx DDP charges. So like a transaction charge for collecting duties and taxes. They were crazy, like between 10 to 30 US dollars a parcel. And so when you start to throw that in the mix, Canada's off as far as I'm concerned, just purely because it's not a long-term solution. Unless, of course, there's legislative changes and everything I've just said goes out the window because Trump decides to back off tomorrow morning. So there's like all these scenarios that make everything extremely fluid. Our key thing is really about having scenarios. So if we look at, hey, yeah, there's potential to now be between 40 and 50% duty if the de minimis comes off. But 40, 50% on your cost if you import into the States, warehouse locally, versus getting caught at the border and you either absorbing it or passing it on and it crashing your conversion are two different things. So for us, it's about, is there a pricing strategy? Is there a way in which we can tiptoe you into the US? Should you hold returns in the US and fulfill using Shopify locations and e-commerce and refillment partners? There's definitely a lot of options. And right now, I think, and it might be certainly in all the discussions we've had in the webinars we've done to date, is really about practical application. I'm sure there's a lot of retailers that are still scratching their heads around what, like, I've rung 10 3PLs in the US, like which one's best? Which one's going to be the best result for me? Is that actually the best thing I should do? Should I look at Canada? Should I look at shipping under first sale rule, which has massive constraints around it? And it's really about piecing that puzzle together. I'd love to have 2 or 3 boxes that everybody fits into. That would be super easy. But everyone is a little bit different because their costs are different. Their RRPs are different. Their shipping costs are different. Their profile of freight is different. And so when you start to model all of those things together, some of the results we get are crazy. Like, people that are only doing 1,000 orders a month to the States, hundreds of thousands of dollars better off by going down the route of putting stock on the ground, even with the de minimis in play today. And then we have others that are doing 10, 15, 20,000 orders a month, and they're actually better off staying in Australia and hoping the de minimis doesn't change. So it all comes down to a number of different elements and factors that come into play. And I guess that's why we have a job. And at the same time, Kai and I have been in the industry from really early days. And, we just want to see the industry make the right decisions and help guide that. And hopefully through sessions like this, we can start to put something into play to be like, here's the pricing strategy. Here's the things you need to do about looking at a 3PL, and ultimately use this time now to stabilize what are your best sellers and really double down on getting volume going while we make these decisions about moving to the States or not moving to the States. And understanding what your cost levers are in every scenario with that, because I don't know what it's like for you. I know that you, help out a lot of companies, and, whether or not a lot of those companies are actually aware of the hard numbers involved and, doing that modeling. And I know you do a lot of that from profitability standpoint, this is very much the same. It's like, what do those numbers actually tell us? And unfortunately, like I said, it's not like, hey, here you go, there's 2 boxes, jump in one of them. There's a little bit more to it than that. But I think today we can kind of get through some of that and put some thoughts out.
Because I think part of it's also to do with like your HS codes as well, because depending on the HS code determines what your taxes duty actually is on that product as well. So in some categories, you're sometimes seeing that increase of being that 10%, but then also that additional 25, 30%, or whatever it could be based on your category. And I guess the simple thing to do, which I've seen some people talk about, is just simply just to pass that on to consumer. We'll just make sure we just pass on to consumer, which, like you said, could crash your conversion rate as well. So that may be a short-term reprieve. It's an easy way just to handle it. But long-term, yeah, it is probably going to do some damage. Actually, short-term and long-term, it will do some damage.
Yeah, it's really interesting on that point, because we have a couple of clients that just shoved it on the cart and just went, we'll try and figure something out, but right now we'll just do that. And when they did do that, they didn't experience any conversion problems, which is so weird, because they just added $40 to $80 on their cart, US, and there was no impact to conversion separating it out. Then we had other clients that roll it up into the value of the goods. Same thing, no real big problems. But then we had a couple of other brands where they're a little bit more price sensitive. And I think, to your point, different verticals and different companies have different results, because they tanked big time. And for us, that was like, again, not one thing for everybody. We're a huge fan of A/B testing, like you are, Mel. Like, even post-purchase needs to be like A/B tested. Do we roll up the taxes? Do we show them? Is there do we absorb some, and then we make sure we take that duty off before we declare it to the carriers? Like, those kind of things are pretty critical with it. But yeah, we saw a wide range of buying behavior. It was like we thought everyone would just crash, but not everybody did. And so I'd love to be able to go like, hey, this is the magic silver bullet here, do this. But yeah, we had 2 very big apparel brands not really feel big conversion drops.
Yeah. And that's something which, as an industry, we always tend to look for. Everyone is looking for that magic bullet of that single thing, which if I do this, it's going to generate that predetermined 100% result, but that never happens. And one of the things which people are considering at the moment is actually to change their manufacturing away from China. Yeah. Obviously, for the last 20, 30, even 50 years, China has very much been the world's manufacturing hub. But now with these changes, obviously, the US administration is looking to target China with these changes. Some brands are starting to look at other options as well. So looking to change from China into like the likes of India, Bangladesh, Vietnam. Is that a good long-term strategy for them to be considering as well? To be looking at changing or diversifying their supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been something that, I refer back to the old days, and seeing I'm now a very old white guy, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I was traveling in China a lot doing freight and logistics, is that there was, if you looked at US, UK and European companies, there was a big diversification. And it was really strange for me as an Australian, New Zealand freight forwarder, was like, why are they shipping from like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Thailand and Vietnam and like all these weird countries, and like even some Eastern European countries? Like, that seemed like the moon to me as far as sourcing strategies. But realistically, it's a global de-risking process that's been going on for a very, very long time. And I think there's some really strong manufacturer in the likes of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, although you always have these geopolitical problems in some of these countries. But, I think for the most part, it's a really sound approach. I think most people since last year have been doing a good job of doing the base work to like get maybe not the core ranges, but like some of the fringe ranges starting to be, or new products starting to get like manufactured somewhere else. There is also a huge amount of cash going from China to Vietnam at the moment, with a lot of Vietnamese factories getting stood up with Chinese money. So, I'd say that with, I guess a little bit of respect to the Vietnamese that have done a great job for decades of making great product. And it's actually a really sound and very strong lane from Vietnam to the States. But yeah, I would say that, Vietnam's only going to get stronger. Some of these countries where we'll start to see cash injections coming in from China and other countries to like stand up best class factories is definitely going to happen. Indonesia, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on with that. And so, yeah, for me, there's the diversification and de-risking of business. That's what you and I do as a business, right? That's our big goal, is to like de-risk businesses from making bad decisions, but also from making like really solid future decisions, whether it's performance marketing or logistics,
And that is one of the interesting things right now, particularly with how volatile that whole geopolitical situation is, where these tariffs have just been have been handed down very quickly, very fast, with no thought to how they're actually going to be policed properly. But it could also happen with other countries. And you mentioned before that China, if Chinese money is going to be propping up factories in other countries as well, whether the US administration, Trump, looks at that as also being, okay, well, let's target those countries too. So it just becomes almost this game of whack-a-mole where you just go from one country to another. But then to get those supply chains up and running in other countries, like to find a new manufacturer is not a quick process. It takes like minimum, I would say, like 6 months to a year to properly be able to vet a good supplier. So suddenly, if that supply chain can also be quickly shut off by additional tariffs based on country of origin, Vietnam, let's say, it becomes this roundabout way. And I think one of the things they're saying is that obviously the goal here is to move manufacturing back to America from a US perspective. But again, the economic incentives may also not be there to actually manufacture those goods in the US anyway.
Yeah, and like I challenged the thinking around the old days of CMT factories in Fiji and Australia and New Zealand, and it's like, does the South Pacific become the new hub of manufacture for footwear and apparel? You like, we joke about it, but literally, I know from some of our existing clients that are manufacturing in Australia that they can't get the same prices, not even remotely close to the same prices, manufacturing domestically in Australia, in the US. And so it's like, actually, there becomes like almost a polar shift in our way of thinking. And like I said, for me, it's about de-risking as much as possible with the information we have to hand and finding good factories. That what it also, and I guess you find this from a marketing perspective as well, Mel, is actually process will always beat price. So do we have the best possible process in place, and are we nimble enough to adjust around that and pivot around that when we have these curveballs come into play? And we've got a number of clients now that have got very structured and very robust supply chains that kind of pivot and adjust. But I'd say the biggest outtake from this whole discussion that you brought up around de-risking production is that there needs to be more of it, and it needs to be more of a focus. There are definitely a lot of mature countries, and especially in apparel, there's a ton of different options that are available there.
But this has been a really great discussion just around where de minimis is heading and the tariffs. And you can expect that this space is going to continue to adapt and evolve over the coming months, and potentially 3 to 6 months, I think you said earlier, is the de minimis horizon.
I think like if we can plan as an industry for that, and then if it's earlier, then we've already had the discussions and we've already got some plans. And if it's longer, great. That just gives us that ability to stretch it a little bit and get proper process in play for the move.
All right. The first topic I want to talk to you about is Commerce Tools. Now, Commerce Tools is one of the tech companies in the headless e-commerce, unified e-commerce space, as they once called it, I believe. They raised money at a valuation of $1.9 billion around the COVID times, like a lot of these companies did. But they've also recently let go of about 10% of their staff in the last few weeks as well, citing the fact that they failed to be able to achieve their growth targets. Now, how do you read this, in terms of like the e-commerce tech space?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a pretense because it's been going on for a little bit, right? We've seen a consolidation, I think definitely from retailers. There was the big boom of SaaS, as you said, 2020, 21, 22, and then the world economy sort of fell off a cliff a little bit, and I know multiple retailers that just culled 20, 30, 40 grand a month of net profit out of SaaS tools that weren't able to articulate their hard dollar value, like value to the business, really. And then for me, that's a really big thing, is that someone can't clearly articulate in 3 points why you can't live without them. Then I start to question the validity or their ability to provide value in hard numbers. Like, actually show me where this is getting. And I feel like this result is very much the flavor of the entire industry, where people are getting a lot more savvy about, wait, why am I paying you this enormous amount of money? Like, and could I be doing this, better? Is there a better process?
I think when they raised the money, it was a very frothy market for e-commerce, for tech.
Crazy.
Huge amount of investment. And then obviously interest rate hikes and everything else like that, money became less freely available to that. But also on the point around like consolidation as well, that we are in this era of kind of tech consolidation, where people are looking to, how do I actually reduce my costs rather than add to my costs? And if you can't, like you say, articulate what you're offering is in 3 seconds, in 3 points or less, why would they choose to use you? Particularly in the e-com space, where you can start to see it really coalescing around like a few really big players. Obviously, in the CMS, e-com platform side, you've got Shopify, which is by and far, far and away the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and even on the CRM side as well, Klaviyo, really showing that they can actually expand across not just small business, but all the way up to enterprise as well, and adding more and more features like we talked about previously with Klaviyo Service. And that's where I see the industry really starting to head. As more and more consolidation happens, it's going to be harder for those smaller niche players to really stand up. Although having said that, though, I saw that Instant did a raise the other day. I think they raised at 18 million for, I can't remember what the valuation was, but that was pretty significant as well, which kind of almost like called into question what I just said.
The interesting part with that is I've been following those guys a little bit, and it's the same as like anyone that's doing a really good job of qualifying the customer journey, and like, maybe it's like, I'm able to get them back spending faster, or I can convert where you've lost them. There's a lot of those post-purchase tools coming into play.
Yep.
And when that happens, I start to wonder about, who's claiming what revenue, which is always the big problem, right? Is that everyone's fighting for the same revenue recognition in this space. But I am seeing some really smart stuff in the post-purchase world that, we've lost them, or we lose them all the time. We've got like a really low retention rate, and maybe there's 20 to 30% of people that we could bring back if we had some really cool tools that are able to quantify their existence. And that's where I'm seeing a bit more money spent and that investment getting done, more so because it's in my space. So I'm probably more privy to it than maybe some of the front of funnel stuff that you see. But yeah, I'm starting to see that qualification start to come through, and that's where the investment's going. But yeah, we still have a lot of PE contacts over in the US and here in Australia, and it's like, the money's still there. They're just way more savvy with it. There's not like the old free cash going out that there used to be.
Yeah. Moving on to another topic then, one of the movements which has really popped up in the last couple of weeks in the US is one which is kind of interesting, with a group called the People's Union USA, who are promoting an initiative for consumers to stop spending at all, in-store, online, on retail, food, fast fuel, fuel, fast food, COVID brain, for 24 hours on Fridays. So really encouraging people not to spend at all on Fridays. And it's getting a little bit of traction, probably a little bit slow at the moment in the US, with only 16% of US consumers saying they're going to participate in it. But it kind of does it speak to like a wider movement which is growing around people being more conscious around consumerism? Yeah, and the fact that, hang on, what are we doing? Like, why are we spending so much money on all these products?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is something that Kai Lincoln started up. Kai's a big advocate of not spending money at all. But it's, from a sustainability background, and certainly I feel it, like my daughter did biological sciences and now, is in that field at Waikato University here in New Zealand. Like, you do start to like really think about those things. And like, even in my buying behavior, like, our household must be one of the only households in Australasia that doesn't regularly shop at Temu. Like it's bananas. Like, you know, the volumes coming into New Zealand and Australia, like the Australian volumes are out of this world, coming in from that, and just that constant consumerism is pretty insane. And so I think it's a healthy thing. It's not great for our industry, but what it does say, it's almost like the Jerry Maguire manifesto that he writes with like less clients, more attention, and he got fired for it. It kind of feels like if I was to start advocating for that, it would head down that route. But I do feel like it's the movement of sustainability and the movement of more awareness. When you go to the US, though, like I don't think we do enough in Australia and New Zealand to really make a material difference around waste and consumerism. But then I go to the States and I'm like, you know what? We're doing okay. Like we're having a pretty red hot go at it by comparison. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it actually catches any legs.
Yeah.
I just feel like everyone will shop more on the other 4 days, maybe.
Well, that's what I think too. I think people are still going to buy what they're going to buy. They just may not buy it on Fridays. So look, and I don't know how that will affect things. That'll obviously affect staffing for bricks and mortar. So there would be impacts if something like this does take off. But it does speak to the fact, like you said, that, you know, at the end of the day, we need to be more conscious about what we're buying from, both from a sustainability perspective, but also from an economic perspective as well. It's no secret that in Australia in particular, we are living well above our means, given that the cost of living, the cost of housing is so great. And eventually something's going to have to give.
Yeah, and the domestic, like what the new administration is not really picking up on in the States is that, you know, China is only picking up a small portion of these new tariff costs. Most of it is being passed straight through to the US consumer. And so while we're trying to like balance domestic manufacturer versus Chinese manufacturer, the people that it's actually hurting are middle class down in the US with domestic inflation. People in the US that are rich are only going to get richer, and the people that are in middle class are going to suffer, and further down the chain is going to suffer because of these tariff changes. And yeah, it's going to be that they're just going to have to be better with their money. And what that call out is for everybody in our space is that we're going to have to get really, really good at getting that discretional dollar. Like everything we have to do has to be best practice to get ahead of everybody else that's in the game that's trying to get that lower discretionary dollar. And that for me is a big part of our process and cutting costs. But how do we elevate the shopping experience so that we get that dollar that's not getting spent anymore?
And what I always say is that this is all about how do you actually create a better perceived value of what your offering is versus your closest competitor.
100%.
And it all comes back down to brand. It comes back down to value.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and the final story we're going to cover off today is Australia Post have recently announced their latest results, showing that they had, in the last half, record revenues up 6.3% with a gross revenue of $5.01 billion from the last half versus the comparable period the year before. And they've put this all to a significant increase in the volume of parcels which were being sent, which was 5.4% up on the previous year. Justin, you've been in the space for a little while. Is this just going to continue to grow with the volume of parcels being sent every single year? Because their data shows that over 70% of Australians purchase during peak.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You know, you're seeing the opposite in the US. So parcel numbers are down, and generally that's the first like litmus test in relation to how's the economy going. Because, you know, in Australia it's up. Parcel volumes were down a little bit in January, but that's pretty normal. But as far as like over here in New Zealand, they're way down. So that's reflective of the recession that's here in New Zealand. But Australia, it seems to just be ticking along and kicking up a little bit. I mean, increases in revenue, I would say, has got a lot to do with more enhanced services. So yeah, there's an increase in parcels. But, you know, I'm starting to see that transition to what we were just talking about in relation to that experience, not only being product, brand, the authentic messaging that goes along with that particular brand, but then the improvement in service, you know, better products on demand. And Australia Post, you know, while we, you know, tussle with them for our clients and, you know, build relationships back with our clients with them, fundamentally still are the workhorse of Australia e-commerce. And I think that the work that they're doing around their locker banks with the on-demand services and that side of things is definitely going to see them continue to be seen as the workhorse that everyone's going with. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of the carriers did. But yeah, as far as no huge surprise for me that it was a busy peak for them. Their KPIs were reasonably good through that time. The one thing I would say is, though, that with Australia Post, there's some stuff around their deadweight contracts and some of the stuff that people are sending out in these huge gift boxes and the big mystery boxes that I'm seeing that are really hurting their contracts right now with Post. But it's, as a whole, I think Post is definitely still a very, very strong operator and a partner that we highly recommend people look at. Probably the bit that they don't align with is our belief in multi-carrier. Yep. So we don't think that Post is all things to all people, but they are a lot of things to a lot of people. So, it's just finding that fine balance between finding multi-carrier life and them. But I'd be interested to see how the rest of the carrier base went through peak this year.
And in terms of investment as well, there seems to be a huge amount of investment into the logistics side of things at the moment in Australia. What have you seen some other carriers in terms of like what they're investing in? And obviously a lot of this is driven by Amazon, who are continuing to raise the bar in terms of what the consumer expectation is for supply and logistics.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big call out. I think there's some early adopters at the moment that have probably taken a few punches for everybody in relation to micro DCs. So this is something we've seen all around the world and predominantly will start to become part of the puzzle for Australia to compete against Amazon. And, realistically, we are going to see at some point Temu and Shein put boots on the ground like they have in the US. And so that's when it becomes the moment where Australia again has to grow up a little bit domestically and be like, okay, well, I should have 2 warehouses. Where am I going to put those 2 warehouses so that I can reduce costs? Because as soon as you put in 2 warehouses, even if it's in Melbourne and Sydney, you're probably going to save somewhere between $1 and $3 a delivery. And it's like you're still got the same outbound logistics costs when, for storage and all the rest of it. So, that's when it starts to become okay, well, I'm at scale. I don't have a huge SKU base. That could make a bit of sense. And that's, again, process over price. Amazon coming into the market have done what everyone should have done. Multiple DCs, great delivery experience, run density in core areas, driving down cost. But yeah, if you take it back to Amazon in the States, they burn billions of dollars retaining customers on that delivery experience. And, Jeff Bezos is still doing okay.
Yeah.
still knocking around on his yacht. So, I mean, that's a different scale. But I guess what I'm seeing is that there's that part of that micro DC or the multiple DC within Australia. We're seeing carriers upping their game in relation to post-purchase engagement, delivery, SMS messaging. Yep. Post does a great job with this. Post have also got their LPO and Locker Bank app that you can throw on the cart, which I think is, we certainly think like places like Mascot and downtown Sydney, where that just smart, you're optimizing it out. Click and collect, Dave rebranding Parcel Point and getting that back up and running and offering a solid click and collect, which does perform well for a lot of these Chinese imports. TG have rebranded and getting themselves into a point where they're actually like, for me, probably the premier express provider in Australia. So there's lots of really cool stuff going on. I find that it's about understanding, like Sydney Metro with some of these on-demand gig carriers, for example. We can get those with the right run density. We can get those very, very close to eParcel Express on cost. And so why would you offer an overnight at X amount when you can offer same-day delivery as your standard offering for Sydney to Sydney Metro or Melbourne to Melbourne Metro or Brisbane to Brisbane, Adelaide to Adelaide Metro? So, just that piece is really starting to, through technology with Starship It and Ship It and ShipStation and all those guys, it's enabling, that tech enabling of best practice is really starting to come to the fore in Australia. I get super passionate about it because I'm a parcel guy, but I think it's a great end result for consumers and a great end result for protection of your brand for retailers by being able to offer this experience. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in the space.
All right, Justin Irvine, my ambassador of Quine. Where can people find you?
So you can hit us up on the Ag Co. So the aggregateco.com. Come and have a look. We're working with over 30 Australian retailers now. We fundamentally love this industry. We've grown up with you. We're a part of it. We're the old crew. Like I don't want to throw you under the bus, but certainly I'll throw the big show under the bus. Where we've been there in the background helping out for a long time, and this continues to be part of that passion to see Australian online retailers succeed and retailers succeed. So yeah, if you need help, certainly with the US, it's out there. It's interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's very fluid. Definitely get in touch. We just want to see you guys make the right decisions, and hopefully we can be part of that.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of This Week in E-commerce. In the meantime, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling, and we'll be back next week.
Cheers, Mel.